And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence.
It was 1776 when the founders signed the writ of independence from the Brits. It was revolution.
Tonight we have an exceptional program because we're going to be talking about probably the one key area that defines whether our country is going to survive as a constitutional republic and a sovereign nation, or if we are going to be swept down the rat hole that has become the world collectivist state. And we've got our guest tonight, G. Edward Griffin, a gentleman who has founded an organization called Freedom Force International, and it is based on the idea that we choose individualism over collectivism. And he will be defining tonight what the differences are between individualism and collectivism and why we need to stand up for the liberty that goes with individualism. So with that, Ed, are you on the call right now?
Yes, I am, Dan. My pleasure to be here.
Wonderful. We are at a point in history where we're going to be forced to choose between freedom and cradle-to-grave control, and I believe that this upcoming election is going to be more important than any election we've had in this country since the Civil War. And with that said, I would love to have you give us an idea of just exactly what the mission of Freedom Force International is, and then we will get into the description of how that organization works.
Well, thanks for that lead-in, Dan. It's my favorite topic, as you know. I've written on a lot of things. I've researched a lot of things over the years, and I suppose most people know me best for my work on the Federal Reserve System. My first book was on the United Nations. You know, I've talked about so many things. But I came to a point in life in about the year 2002 when I realized that all of this research and all of this learning, all of this getting wiser and wiser, doesn't amount to a hill of beans if you can't stop the trend, if you can't do something to change it, if you can't do anything about it. So I became obsessed at that time with the question, what can be done about it? Is there anything that can be done about it? You know, we run into people all the time that are so despondent. They say, it's gone too far. In fact, it was already done at the end of the Civil War. It was too late, because we lost the ability to be a republic then, I say, because we couldn't secede from the Union. If you can't secede from the Union, then the Union is stronger than the component parts, and we lost our state rights. And you can go back to the Civil War, you can go back to World War I, you can go back to World War II, you can go back to last week, and now we're looking at the current elections, and each step along the way seems to be like the biggest step ever. And this will be the outcome of the future. And who am I to say that one of these steps will not be? I think it's kind of a continuum, Dan. I think it's like people asking me, we talk about the New World Order. When will the New World Order be here? It's the question I hear a lot. And my answer is, well, wake up, everybody. It's here. It's been here for a long time. It's just a question of how extensive has it become. And so, they're building it brick by brick, and the walls are getting higher. The mechanisms are getting stronger and more visible. But it's a continuum. And so going back to your question and my wandering answer is that I came to the conclusion in about 2002 that we had to do something about it to stop this continuum from happening. I knew that the train of collectivism, and we might talk about what that really is in a moment, but it's just the idea of big government replacing a government that serves the people. It's a government that controls the people, and they do it in the name of the people. They make the people think it's their idea or in their best interest and all that. That's basically what collectivism is. But the idea that if we didn't turn this train around, it was going down the track in the wrong direction. We had to slow it down, we had to stop it, and then get it going in the opposite direction. And I knew that this took time, but how were we going to do that? So finally I get to the specific answer to your question, which is I came up with some ideas, and we created an organization called Freedom Force International, which was to implement those ideas. So we come at last to, well, what are those ideas? And the first thing I saw that we needed to really turn this around, and when I say we, well, I'm talking about the folks in the United States, but all around the world too, because all countries, all regions are facing similar problems, and this is a global movement. If we don't turn it around globally, we won't have much chance in doing it around even in our own nation today. But anyway, be that as it may, I knew that, what does it take to turn this around? And so the first thing I came to see very clearly was that we have to know what we're fighting for. Not what we're fighting against, but what we're fighting for. Most people have no idea of what it is they want. All they know is what they don't want. They know, for example, that they don't want to vote for candidate A or candidate B. And so they don't vote for a candidate, they vote against candidates. They know what they don't want. They rise up and they try and overthrow tyranny, and they get rid of one tyrant or one dictator at great cost in treasure and blood. But finally they're victorious, and then they create a new system, and lo and behold, it turns out to be just about as bad, if not worse, than the one they overthrew. It's because they didn't look at what it is that they wanted. All they knew is that they didn't like that dictatorship that they were living under. And so it became very clear to me, Dan, that we had to know what we wanted, and we had to have a statement of principles. It wasn't enough just to say, well, we want limited government. We had to be able to say how limited, exactly how limited, and under what conditions should it have power, and other conditions when it should not have power. Where do we draw the line? We don't want to leave it open as sort of a vague, open-ended thing like we should want less government than we have now. Sure, that's good to know because it's a direction to go in, but how would we know if we reach the point or not if we don't have a clear idea of what it was? And so we came up with something called the Creed of Freedom, and it's a series of about a dozen little points that this is what we believe in, it's what we believe in, and this is what we're fighting for. We came up with the creed, and so that was the first thing. And we found out, by the way, too much to my delight, that all around the world, people from all cultures, all religions, all parts of the world, different nationalities, people of both genders, people of many different lifestyles, people no matter what, as long as they had in their hearts an idea of something that was good for all of mankind, not just for some at the expense of others, but something like, the basic directive, do unto others as you would have them do unto us. If they could buy into that, if they were those kinds of people, that kind of a person, they bought into the Creed of Freedom, and I was very delighted to see that. And then the next thing that loomed up was, well, okay, now we've got unity, we understand what we're fighting for, and all of a sudden we have this real international brotherhood. Really, because when you get in a room and people have signed on to this Creed of Freedom and they're all talking, it's amazing. You can walk up to somebody and within about 3 minutes you feel like you've known this person all of your life because they have that same understanding, the same worldview. Their values are the same. And it's a real brotherhood. I was delighted to see that happen. So now after that's in place, now what? Now the next question is, well, how do we get rid of the collectivists who are in power? If we just stay in our ivory tower and say, well, this is the way it should be, and this is what we should have, and this is our creed, this is what we believe in, and we just wait for the world to suddenly realize that we're correct, it'll never happen, because those who have an opposite point of view, all of the criminal-minded people, that 15% or thereabouts who are what I call the predator class, all those people who gravitate into government because they know that government is the legalized use of force, and they know that if they can get into government, then they can do what would normally be illegal if they weren't in the government. If they did the same things out of government that they do in government, they'd go to jail. So all of the predator class, they gravitate into government. And how do we get them out? Just by having a better idea? I don't think so, especially when they not only are in government, but they control the school system and the media, and in many cases, I am sorry to say, even many of the church organizations. They control so many things to keep people from understanding the things that I'm talking about. So how do you get them out? That's the next thing that had to be done, and so we devised a plan. And it was not as difficult as it might seem, because we took the plan right from our collectivist opponents. You can say whatever you want to about their methods, their ethics. We don't want anything to do with their methods or their ethics, especially their ethics, because they lie, they cheat, they steal, they murder. They don't hesitate to commit genocide if necessary to advance their goals. We don't want any of that, but they have certain strategies that are brilliant. And you'll find them, for example, in any organization where they have influence over the political values of the nation. In our country, in the USA, the strongest organization like that is called the Council on Foreign Relations. It's about 4,000 people. Seems like a lot, but it's not. And yet, there are lots of churches in my hometown in Los Angeles that have that many members in the church. And yet, these 4,000 people are really the hidden influence in the United States government and in the whole society. You look at all these members, and they're not just teachers or shoe salesmen or engineers. They're the politicians. They're the ones that are the presidents of the United States, the head of the State Department. They're the ones who are the chief of staff in the military. They're the ones who are the senators and the congressmen on the Supreme Court. They're the ones who are the presidents of the universities. They're the ones who own the NBCs of the world, all the networks, the Washington Post, the New York Times. These are what those people are doing. And so because they have influence in all of what they call the power centers of society, a relatively few number of them can literally control the rest of society. It doesn't take a lot, as long as they have influence in these great power centers of society. And that is how they have been able to come to power. So what we decided to do is take that little slice of their strategy and just turn it around and use it ourselves. We have to get off of our couches, away from in front of our television sets, stop complaining about how bad things are, and go out to where the people are. The real people in the United States are working in or belong to organizations. It might be labor unions, social organizations, church organizations, political parties. Wherever they are, we have to go to where the people are. And we have to work like the devil to become influential among them, to earn the position of leadership, to earn their respect, and to influence them by actually being among them and working with them. And so that became the strategy for Freedom Force International. And that really is what it's all about, Dan, as you well know. We have a goal. In other words, we know what we believe in. It's the creed. We have a statement of principles, and we have a strategy for coming to power and for kicking these collectivists and these criminal-minded individuals out of their positions of great influence and power. And there you have it. I don't know how long it took me to say that, but that really is everything in a nutshell.
Well, that is a really good overview of what the mission of Freedom Force is, and it certainly describes how the inner thoughts that you had when you put this organization together, because you really are the patriarch of the organization. But one of the things that concerns me, and it's, again, going back to individualism versus collectivism, is how our culture has been completely, not just our political system, but our entire culture. And you mentioned that. You talked about that being part of the school system, the education, being part of our university systems, being part of our media. Virtually all of our country has been really, let's say, immersed in this collectivism as a idea of our culture. And can you kind of maybe elaborate a little bit on how that change has happened over time? I know you've done a number of films and other things about that, and how that's happened over a period of time, and why it's so important that we realize how it's happened so that people can understand how we can change it.
Well, yes, and this, of course, is a huge topic, and we could talk for hours, if not days, on that. The history, interestingly enough, the history of how it happened is easy to find. However, it is not found in the curricula of our schools. You'd think that something as important as concepts that have literally changed the culture of the United States would be something that should show up in the history books, American history books, but it doesn't. You have to go elsewhere to find it, but as I said, it's easy to find if you're willing to go to any well-stocked library. And in a phrase, let's back up just a little bit, because we're talking about a shift of the culture away from respect for something called individualism and toward the acceptance of the principle of collectivism. And as those words almost describe themselves, a system based on individualism is one that considers that individuals are the center of society, and the most important purpose of society is to serve the individual. Whereas the concept of collectivism has it just the other way around. And that concept says that the individual is merely to serve the group, the collective, that the individual must be sacrificed, if necessary, for the greater good of the greater number. Well, that may sound like it's not an important issue, but it's terribly important when it comes to personal freedoms, because individuals have freedoms, but groups do not. I mean, individuals have rights because groups do not. And the reason I say groups do not have rights is because groups don't really exist. They're not tangible. They're not materialistic. You can't touch a group. It's a concept. It's an abstract idea in the mind. It's like a mathematical concept. Numbers don't really exist except as a mental calculation or mental view. So it's like the idea of a forest. A forest doesn't exist. Only trees exist. You can't touch a forest, but you can cut down trees and touch trees. And so in the same way, you look at a group and you say, well, there's a group, but you don't really see a group. What you see is a bunch of individuals. So individuals are real, and this concept of group is an abstraction. Individuals have rights, but groups have rights only to the extent that the individuals within that group have rights. So the cornerstone of everything is the individual. And I think the best example I could make, it sort of brings this home, it's the idea of a lynch mob. Okay, there's a lynch mob. Now we say the majority should rule. We've got to serve, the best interest of the group, right? So, okay, the majority rules. So the poor guy, he's at the end of the rope. There's only one vote. So he loses. So if you follow the concept of the greater good of the greater number in the pure mathematical sense, well, then you have to say lynch mobs are fine. Because after all, that's the majority. The majority should rule. And so all of this gets wrapped up in. It's a real deep subject, and it's a subject that they should teach in schools, but they don't. Well, except to the extent that they teach collectivism, and they do teach collectivism, but they don't teach the alternate view of individualism like they did at one time. It was interesting to me, Dan, when I started down this path some years ago, to find out that in all of the old books, and by that I mean 80 years or more, or 100 years ago, the word collectivism and the word individualism, those two words were commonly used. They were everywhere in the philosophical or ideological literature of the time. People used it, and the readers understood what they meant, but you use those words today, and people look at you like, well, what does that mean? They've fallen into great favor. And I think that was not necessarily accidentally. I think starting with certainly World War II, but I think as early as World War I, it was a definite conscious move on the part of educators to get people to thinking in terms of individualism as being a bad thing or a thing of the past. We know that there were the Rockefellers and the Carnegie Group spent a lot of money paying educators to rewrite history books, and we document this. This is right. They say this is in the libraries. You can find this. They spent huge amounts of money, set up committees, and paid universities, and then placed their own people at the heads of certain departments in those history departments, I should say, in those great universities, like Columbia University, for example. And they set in motion the thing that we now call modern education, or that kind of thing. It was the idea that we can abandon the old ideas because they no longer serve us well. And the script was that, yes, at one time individualism was necessary and probably a productive thing because those were the pioneer days. We needed rugged individualists, but now, thank goodness, now we are wiser now. Now we live in an interdependent society, and now globalism is a good thing, and we're moving in that direction. So anybody that sticks with those old ideas of individualism is outdated, and it's just too bad about them. But let's get with it. This is the modern age, and collectivism is the wave of the future. Now, that is actually what happened. That is what we're talking about, is that the huge amounts of money that were pumped into the universities from organizations like the Carnegie Endowment Fund and the Rockefeller funds, several of them actually, they actually, in their own minutes, said that this was their objective, is to recreate the textbooks of America to teach the advantages and superiority of collectivism over individualism. And it's quite an interesting story. We don't have time to go into all of it. I'll just summarize by saying that was the plan, and the people that became the leaders in that movement were the ones who were on the payroll of these foundations that I've just described. And so that is how it happened. The teachers' colleges became loaded up with teachers who were paid to teach this, so now the teachers are teaching it, and then the new teachers were taught by those teachers. Now we have several generations, and the idea of collectivism is not even anywhere to be seen. The word has disappeared. Excuse me, I said collectivism. I meant to say individualism. The word has disappeared, or if you find it, it's discredited. Oh, individualism. That means selfishness, doesn't it? So
right, it's a pejorative term instead of a positive term anymore.
Yeah, it's a positive term because it represents individual rights, individual responsibility, the importance of the individual. Freedom is based on individual. You don't have freedom of groups. You have freedom only of individuals. So, okay, I'm taking too long again, which is my attention.
No. I do remember a interview you did of a gentleman who was legal counsel with the Reese Commission. And
Norman Dodd, yes.
Norman Dodd, yes. And how he was discussing how one of his attorneys that worked for him had actually gone into the foundations and had access to their archives, to their corporate minutes, and determined all these things that you're talking about right out of their own corporate minutes.
Yeah, that's true, yeah. And so this is not just made up. This is not a conspiracy theory or anything like that. This is history. It's just that it's hard to find that history. It's certainly not taught. I thought it was a bunch of hogwash when the first time I heard about it. But no, it's real. And so that's what happened to America, and it's still happening. They talk about Wall Street being the evidence of decadent capitalism. Oh, Lord, help us. I mean, the true definition of capitalism, the classic definition, being, individualism and private ownership of property and the means of production and so forth. We haven't seen capitalism in the United States in almost 2 generations or 3 generations.
Yeah, really, in many ways, almost 100 years.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. So what we see in this corruption in Wall Street today is not crony capitalism, it's crony collectivism. The whole system is collectivism, and they're still calling it capitalism because they don't understand what the word means.
Right.
So that's our problem. So that's why we have a real educational job ahead of us, and that must be done before we can bring about any reform, because if somebody like me stood up and ran for political office and started to say the things that I'm saying, the voters probably, with their present level of misinformation and lack of information, would probably write me off or somebody off as some kind of a fruitcake.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I have to tell you, Ed, I think that anyone today running for political office ought to do so with the understanding they're going to only be there one term. Because if they stand up for what our constitutional oath of office really says and what it really means, they are not going to be in favor by the voters because, frankly, we've turned into a culture of electing politicians because they resemble Santa Claus instead of Patrick Henry.
Well, that's right. And so that's why the importance of the creed of freedom is as great as it is, because unless people understand what are the foundations of liberty, if they don't get it, well, they're going to fall for some kind of any kind of a proposal. They'll be looking for a man on a white horse. They'll be looking for somebody to stand up and who will accurately tell them all the bad things about the present system, and just because he's telling the truth about how bad the present system is, the voters will think that that makes him a good person, when in fact he could well just be waiting for his turn at the trough.
Yeah, that happens more often than not.
It happens over and over again, yes.
Yes, it does. I'd like to discuss the 7 pillars of collectivism. Can you roll those off the top of your head?
Well, pretty much. I'll have to condense. Maybe we can only cover a couple of them, but I think that'll be enough to give people an idea. The Creed of Freedom, it has actually eight principles, Dan, and the first one is the intrinsic nature of rights. And here again, I have to back up just a little bit to say that anything that I'm going to say in the next couple of minutes is not my own original material. I've stolen this from the great thinkers and writers throughout the ages. I've spent most of my adult life reading this literature and being amazed at how wise some of these people are from antiquity. And so I just jotted down all these concepts, and then I just to make this complete, not only was I reading the classic literature of the Liberty Library, but I also became intrigued by the collectivists, and I became pretty up to speed on communism. I used to hang out, as a young fellow, I used to hang out down at the Communist Bookstore in Los Angeles, down on Larchmont Street. It was called the People's Bookshop, and I went to some of their study classes. I think I read all of the classic literature written by Lenin and Marx and Engels and Stalin, even, all of those bright collectivists. And I got it. And then I also, read Mein Kampf with Adolf Hitler, and I read the writings of Mussolini, and then I, read stuff by Mao Zedong, and I realized that, all of these collectivist regimes that we don't like and we fought wars to defeat, like communism and Nazism and fascism, well, they all had certain characteristics that were common to them. In fact, they were more common, they were more alike than they were unalike. So I started to keep track of them. And I noticed that in the freedom literature, also there were certain characteristics that were similar. And lo and behold, out of that process, it surprised me to find out that the freedom characteristics and the collectivist characteristics were the same, except they were the opposite. The principles were the same, but they were opposite. For every principle on collectivism that they believed in, the individualists said, no, we believe the opposite. So on these 8 principles, there are 2 positions on each of them. So here we go. The intrinsic nature of rights. And what that is all about is that individualists believe that rights, human rights, come with the individual when he's born. It's intrinsic to each person. Some people would say that means that it was God-given. There were God-given rights. Others would say, well, I don't know about God, but I do know that we have those rights when we're born. They're part of us. We're entitled to them, and that's it. Okay, that's the individualist point of view. The collectivist says, no. Rights don't come with the individual. Rights have to be given to the individual by the state. So they say, we who run the state are the ones that, we're the God. We're the gods who grant the rights. Well, a lot of people believe that. If you read, for example, the Draft Covenant of Human Rights put out by the United Nations, it says very clearly that all of these rights, and they have some wonderful rights listed, and it sounds good, the right to freedom of speech, the right to a job, right to health care, right to travel, all of these things, even freedom of religion, they say there's a right for that. But then you read the whole thing and it says, except. Oh, what's this except? Except as may be provided for by law. In other words, you've got these rights until the politicians pass a law to take them away. And that's perfectly logical, because if the state can grant you your rights, the state can take them away. You have no argument on that point. So there is a very... And
I have to, at this point, I have to inject the statement that the 1936 Soviet Constitution and the UN Declaration of Human Rights are virtually identical.
Oh, yes, they are. In both documents, that Constitution of the Soviet Union is an amazingly pleasant-sounding thing. It grants all these rights, but that's where the concept first comes from. In the Soviet document, it says, accept, accept, accept. And in each of these rights, it says, you've got them except as may be provided for by law. Well, you know, Stalin and the boys all had laws. They granted you freedom of liberty, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, but they took them away if they didn't like what you were saying. So right. That's a huge difference right there. A lot could be said on that, but let's move on to the second one, which is the supremacy of the individual. Now, I've already mentioned that, but again, just to repeat, the collectivists believe that the individual must be sacrificed, if necessary, for the greater good of the greater number. But the individualist believes that the greater good for the greater number really is to protect the rights of the individual. That is the greater good for the greater number. And that principle, by the way, was spelled out very clearly in the Declaration of Independence for America. It said very clearly that the function of the state that was being created was to guarantee the rights, not to grant them, but to guarantee and protect the rights of the citizens. Very important concept. People often read those words and don't give any thought to what the difference is between to guarantee a right and to protect the right versus grant the right. So there you have that. So
right, and that's also known as unalienable rights, which is directly out of English common law.
Yes, exactly. So we have to understand, at least we understand very clearly in the Creed, that the individual is the center of society. And the whole purpose of the state, the only proper purpose of the state, is to protect the individual, his life, liberty, and property. To protect him, to protect those rights, not to grant those rights, to protect them, because the individual is the source of everything. All right, we go on to the third one, which is the freedom of choice. Now, that's really interesting, because the collectivists believe that if something should be done, then there ought to be a law to force people to do it, because otherwise people might be too stupid. They might make mistakes. They won't make the right choices, you know. And so, for example, a collectivist would be a person who really loves seatbelt laws. I mean, after all, you know, seatbelts are good for you. If you don't wear your seatbelt, you or someone, a child or someone, could get hurt. They could be killed. So we're going to pass a law. We're not going to try and convince you to put your seatbelts on because it's good for you. No. We don't believe in that, because you might not do it. So we're going to pass a law, and we're going to force you to do it, or if you don't, we throw you in prison. And so that's the collectivist mindset. The individualist says, no, seatbelts are important. They really are. You ought to wear them, and I'm going to show you by my good example that I wear mine, and I'm going to urge you to do so. I might even contribute some money to produce a documentary film, and we show it on television to convince you that it's very important, but we don't believe in forcing you to do what we think you should do, because we also want the right to be our own masters and make our own decisions in our segments of our life. So that's another important thing. And then finally, property rights. Collectivists believe that individuals should not own property. It should be the collective, should be owned by the state. Well, you can make it, that's a big topic, because they say, well, you know, how can you own the earth? And then we get into the problems with the word ownership. The legal definition of ownership is the one that we need to focus on. Simply means that in the culture in which you live, in that culture and the set of standards and mores that your heritage has given to you, and let's talk about the United States at least, our heritage is that people have a right to own property. Now, I'm not going to argue with others that say no, they shouldn't. I'm just going to say that's what I want. I want the right to own property because I know it's part of nature. All animals in the animal kingdom have this instinct for private property. There's a very interesting book about that. It's let's see, what is it called? I'm getting off the track here, but it's the human. I'll come back to that anyway. It shows that all of the forms of life, at least in the mammal world, have this instinct to protect and to own personal property. There are rituals about it. It's closely bound up with the mating ritual, actually, and it's just part of our instinct. So it's natural, and it's a good thing because if you have property and you have a legal right to it, and that's we're back to the question of ownership. Ownership merely means you have a legal right to it in your culture, to have an absolute right to possess it and use it as you see best. And that means you can sell it if you wish to, and so on. Those who own property in that sense will take care of their property, and they become good stewards of it. If you don't have that right to own your own property, and everything you have is not yours, it's controlled by the state, which means it's controlled by the bureaucrats who are hired by the state, and they tell you what to do. It really means it's owned by the bureaucrats. With people who have to live under that kind of a system do not take care of their property. And you can see that, when somebody is renting a house, and on a street, and right next to it is a house that's owned by somebody, which one has all the garbage in the front yard?
Right,
that's how it works. So,
well, there's a saying: you don't wash a rental car.
Right. Yeah. And you take a rental car into ditches and places you wouldn't dream of taking your own car. So, yeah, there it is. So, property rights is good for property. It's good for the environment. It's good for freedom, because if you don't own property, that means your freedom depends on your right to have your own property, your house, your shelter, your food, your job, If you don't own any of those things, then you're dependent on somebody to give them to you. And whoever gives them to you is the one you must obey. And that's why collectivists do not like the idea of property rights, because they want you to obey them.
Right. We're going to take a very short break at this point, and Kelby will turn the show over to you for just a minute, and we'll be right back, so keep that thought in mind.
Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, we want to thank you so much for coming on to this radio show week in and week out, Thursdays, 6 p.m. Pacific. As you know, we have excellent guests like Mr. Griffin and many more. On Wednesday evenings, we do have a Building the State phone call. It's basically an education for people to get their mind wrapped around how to bring back a de jure body politic. We encourage you to go to republicfortheunitedstates.org and take a look at a series of 6 years of phone calls and radio shows, but you'll get the call information for the Wednesday night at 6 p.m. at republicfortheunitedstates.org. Mr. Happel, I yield.
Thank you, Kelby. That idea, Ed, of private property, I mean, a lot of people just think in terms of houses and land and that sort of thing when they're dealing with private property. But private property is also your own mind and the thoughts that you have and the freedom to have freedom of choice. That is your personal property. Am I correct in that?
Well, I certainly hold to that point of view, definitely. If it's not your property, then what is it, And a lot of people say you can take everything from me, but you can't take my thoughts. But unfortunately, in today's world, even those are subject to attack, They're trying to brainwash people. They condition them in schools to think that certain thoughts are unacceptable, or that they're evil.
Well, that's political correctness.
Political correctness, yeah. So even your own thoughts are under attack. And when you're young, you cannot, you really can't defend yourself against that, because you think it's being taught, therefore it's correct. So, yeah. But I do agree with you. Yes, your inner thought, your will, all of those things are definitely property. So.
Okay. And we get into other things, laws, how laws are under collectivist systems. They favor one group or one person or one class of people over another, where individualism, all those laws are equal. everyone is equal under the law.
Right.
Would you like to kind of expand on some of that too?
Well, yes, that's principle number 6, and so let's deal with that, and then we'll come back to number 5, which we just skipped over. But yeah, that's very important, Dan. In fact, it's a short statement in the Creed. Let me just read it so that people can get a sense of how the Creed is stated. So here it is. The heading is Equality Under Law. I believe that all citizens should be equal under law, regardless of their national origin, race, religion, gender, education, economic status, lifestyle, or political opinion. Likewise, no class should be given preferential treatment, regardless of the merit or popularity of its cause. To favor one class over another is not equality under law. That's a very simple statement, and even the collectivists would start off by saying, yeah, we agree with that. That's why we want a special law to take money away from the rich and give it to the poor so they can be equal.
Right.
So right away they don't get it, because to take money from those who have more money and give it to those who have less money is to favor one class over another. It is not equality under law. So, right. And even though it may be popular and it may sound like it's the right thing to do, under the principles of individualism versus collectivism, it is definitely the wrong thing to do. I saw in my mind it was a cartoon, but I guess it wasn't. It was just a statement that somebody walked into a federal office building, and there was a door for the, I guess the food stamps, or I don't know what department takes care of food stamps in the federal government, but it was all about, come in here and get your food stamps and get qualified. We have plenty of help for you. And the next door down the hall was for the Bureau of Land Management, and I guess in the wall behind it says, do not feed the animals, it makes them dependent, and then they cannot take care of themselves.
Oh, that is.
It's funny how you can see harsh principles when it's applied to the animal kingdom, but when it's applied to humans, then, we feel so sympathetic for those who suffer that we want to pass a law. We're back to that again. In other words, if we want to help the poor people, we don't think, individualists think that we're going to help the poor people because we will do it. We will dig into our pockets and be charitable. But the collectivist says, no, I don't want to do it by myself. Let's pass a law and make everyone else do it. In fact, I might even get a job working for the government to administer this program. So this way, I don't really, doesn't cost me anything. I make money by helping other people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. As a matter of fact, I think there have been studies done that the most conservative groups are the biggest givers in charitable collections, and the liberal givers are the least charitable.
Yeah, and you can understand that because many people, regardless of how you classify them, they'll see somebody on the street panhandling, for example, and in fact I've even felt this myself. I'm thinking to myself, well, why are they out here? Why don't they go down and get one of those government programs that I pay so much money for? So there's a tendency for people to say, I'm already paying for this poor chap in need. I don't have to pay twice. If there's a government program, people have a tendency to be less charitable because of that. So it always backfires, and I don't care how you cut it. When you think that you're applying collectivism and coercion by law to force some people to help other people in need, you have set in motion the forces of destruction that are not going to achieve your objective at all. In fact, they're going to achieve just the opposite goal. You're not only going to not help the people in need, but you're going to weaken those who have the capacity to help. So that's a harsh reality, and I go back to that sign, do not feed the animals.
Well, and the reality of it is that with that sort of a system, you take away any incentive of individuals to take care of themselves because they realize that if they don't, someone else will be there to pick it up for them. And a lot of people would prefer to have someone else do all the heavy lifting for them.
Yeah, and there's a big difference between theory and practice. You know, the idea that we can have a government program to take care of the poor is a great idea, but now we have so many years of experience to check the theory against. And we know that whenever it's tried, whether it's in our own government, starting with FDR's, programs back in the Depression, all the way through the Soviet Union, right now into modern America, whenever the government gets into this charity business, it messes it up royally, and there's corruption there. People start making a huge killing off of it, and the poor become even more poor and more dependent on their masters. So we have to keep. Anyway, that's what's all behind this equality under law. Mm-hmm. So we jump back to number 5, Dan, and that's money without coercion. And so again, I think maybe it's best if I just read it. It's short.
Sure.
I believe in freedom to accept or reject any currency or other forms of money based entirely upon my personal judgment of its value, because a monopoly over the issuance of money and the power to force others to accept it leads to corruption, inflation, and legalized plunder. And that's about as concise as I know how to say it.
Mm-hmm.
Most people don't think that there's a connection between money and freedom. But when you give the government the power to create money out of nothing, which our government does, in fact, all governments do that now, they create money out of nothing. Well, even worse than that, they create it out of debt. And they can create any amount that they wish, and that always, and then they force their citizens to accept it under penalty of law. That's the bad part. If if individuals had the freedom to accept or reject that money, or to use some other money, to use silver or gold or tickets to Disneyland or whatever they want to use, if they're free to use anything as barter or money, then this fiat money that governments put out would not be accepted. And so there would be an automatic check against this abuse. But that's the reason that all governments have what they call legal tender laws, which are nothing more or less than laws to force us to use their very bad money. So that's what that's all about.
Okay.
Finally, we come to 7, which is the great leader. Here it is. I believe that leadership is a natural outgrowth of human dynamics and is essential for social order and large-scale tasks. However, there are 2 types of leadership. One is based on coercion and decree, found in military organizations and totalitarian political systems. The other is based on persuasion and good example, found in voluntary organizations and free political systems. We must evaluate leaders not only on their stated goals, but on which type of leadership they offer. Their goals may be admirable, but how they pursue those goals may be tyranny. All modern totalitarian systems have a great leader who claims to represent the best interests of the people, but who is, in reality, merely a dictator. Truly great political leaders do not follow that path. Well, that's about all I have to say on that. And
well, that's pretty complete.
Yeah, and we face that problem in our modern elections. We're facing it in this election coming up.
Well, as a matter of fact, I wanted to bring that up, the fact that we have social progressives in both major political parties, and they share a love of that same pillar system of the collectivist system. And I'm not talking about all members of each political party, but I'm certainly talking about the progressive elements of both major political parties. And that doesn't give us as citizens a whole lot of option.
No. And that that progressive element that you talk about really is the element that endorses collectivism. And we've got, strong contingents on behalf of collectivism in both major political parties in America. Both. They really don't disagree with each other on should we have Social Security or progressive income tax or health care or some subsidized mortgages, government-paid education. They don't question any of that. They just want to debate over how much and who's going to control it. That's all. So their philosophy is the same in both political parties.
Right, they are very much so. Well, let's talk about Freedom Force and how it is designed, and also, I have to say, becoming a catalyst for liberty groups on a worldwide scale, and how the essence of Freedom Force is to bring all these disparate groups together in a way that we can learn how to work together and improve our lot, with the idea that all we really have to share in common is our love for liberty and our agreement with the creed of freedom.
That's about it. Our love for liberty. I guess everybody has that, but they don't necessarily know what freedom is. That's where the creed of freedom comes in, is to clarify what that really means. Unfortunately, many people think that freedom is merely being out of jail. You know, you're not in prison, you're free. No, that's not it. So that's the first step, and then they have to understand that there are certain strategies that we must pursue if we wish to get in there where the power is and get the hands of these maniacs off of the levers of power. And that means that we have to control power. That means we have to inherit power. And that scares everybody, including me. You know, people say, well, power corrupts, right? Absolutely. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't have any. You know, I like to say that the analogy is guns are dangerous. Guns are very dangerous. People get accidentally killed by guns. The only thing more dangerous than having guns is not having guns.
Right.
That's it. Sure, it's dangerous. That doesn't mean you reject it. It means you have to be very, very careful in how you use it and make sure that your motives are correct. And lots of safeguards. We have to do that. But if we walk away from holding power or reaching for power, we lose. There's no way that we can convince these collectivists who now hold the levers of power to voluntarily let go. They're not going to let go of the Patriot Act or gun control legislation that they're pursuing. And any of those, as long as they are in office and in positions of influence, they're going to continue to rule us. So if we want to change that, we have to get into those areas of power and work very hard to acquire power ourselves. And then one of the major features of Freedom Force, which we don't have time to go into here, is the mechanisms to prevent those holding power, including us, from abusing it. There are certain rules, regulations, certain things that have to be followed, and the people in our group, our organization, have to watch our own leaders like a hawk, because we do know that power does corrupt. Mm-hmm. And even some of us, I'm sorry to say, some of us, I'm sure, in looking down the future, if and when we become successful, and we ourselves, as a large group of citizens, have political influence, some of them will be tempted and will probably be, led to the top of the mountain and said, if you just join with us, you can have all of this. They'll be corrupted. So we have to have mechanisms to watch these people that do become successful and keep them in line. Having said that, that means we must take the risk, and we have to have guns to protect ourselves against criminals with guns and tyrants with guns. We must have power to protect ourselves against having criminals acquiring that same power over us. So now, that's another way of looking at Freedom Force. It's bigger than just, an educational campaign. It's a strategy campaign and a philosophical campaign. It requires, let me say this, it doesn't require a lot of people. We're not looking for 51% of the population. In other words, this is not a question of majority rule. All systems in history have been ruled, through influence at least, by a very small group of people, not 51%. Mm-hmm. The American Revolution was fought with a couple of percentage of people, and the rest of the citizens just sort of hanging out saying, well, let's see which side is going to win, and then we'll say that we were on that side all along, unfortunately. I think that history shows that like about 3% or less of the population always determines the course of that culture, and the rest will go along with whoever wins. So that's our clue. We're looking for 3%. As the Marine says, we're looking for a few good men. Well, we're looking for a few good men and women who want to step up and become active and to take a leadership role in society, and all of us together, we can literally change the world.
And change it for the better.
Oh, yes, of course. Yeah, it's
Absolutely.
not just a political slogan like change or something like that. No, this is real change. This is to change it from collectivism to individualism.
Individualism.
Yes.
Yep. Well, I would like to have you talk about the two events that we've got planned with Freedom Force. One coming up, our third annual Congress, and I say we because I am a member of Freedom Force, and very proudly so, and have been working with you on several of these projects, and very excited about them. But I'd like to have you talk about the events coming up. The first one in December in Phoenix with the third annual Congress, and then follow up with a discussion of the Red Pill Expo next summer in Bozeman, Montana.
Oh, yeah, these are two great events coming up, and I'm going to telescope my message to your listeners now and say, I hope in the next couple of minutes you go get a piece of paper and a pencil, because you're going to write down some data here about these events. I think many of the listeners are going to want to attend. I hope so anyway. The first one, as you've mentioned, is a big meeting in Phoenix coming up on December 3 and 4, and it's actually the third Congress of Freedom Force. That we've been around for a lot longer than 3 years, but we've only been having Congresses for the last 3 years, and this is the number 3 coming up. So the thing that caused these meetings in the first place is because we had to get the delegates together and replenish the members of our leadership council, and a lot of internal business. But then we got the idea that let's do something while we're there. Let's bring some experts together and let's learn something and formulate some strategies and so forth. And that, as you know, Dan, largely with your help, we did that in spades last year in Paso Robles, California. So this year we're going to do it in Phoenix. And we've decided to give the whole meeting a single theme, and it is this: global warming, an inconvenient lie. Now that's about much as a challenge as you can think of to the large segment of current thinking. You know, Al Gore's movie Global Warming and Inconvenient Truth is really a very inconvenient lie. And we're going to prove it. We're bringing together the world's top experts on this subject, and they're going to put an end once and for all to the myth of the anthropogenic, man-caused global warming. And so it's an all-day session, and actually going into the second day. And just to give people an idea who's going to be there, coming from the UK is Lord Monckton, Christopher Walter Monckton, who is the third Viscount Monckton of Brenchley in the UK. He's known for, well, so many things: his journalism, his conservative political views, his opposition to the EU, and especially for his masterful debunking of the global warming myth. And in earlier this year, he was a national leader in rallying the British vote on behalf of Brexit. So anyway, he'll be there. We'll have a lot of people from the academic community. William Happer, Professor Happer at Princeton University. He's a specialist in the field of atomic physics and optics and spectroscopy, if I can get that pronounced right. He's a pioneer developer of something called adaptive optics. He served as the director of science in the U.S. Department of Energy, and he's a strong voice against the myth of anthropogenic global warming. And he says, and this is his message, there is absolutely zero correlation between global levels of carbon dioxide and climate change. And he will prove that. And then we have another professor, Tim Ball. He's retired now, but he comes from the University of Winnipeg in Canada, and all kinds of credentials. He's really an expert in this field. He's chairman of the Winnipeg Advisory Committee on Hazardous Waste and all that stuff. He's authored 53 scientific papers, and Professor Ball says that human-caused global warming is the biggest deception in history. I'll be speaking there, probably talking about many of the things we discussed today, Dan, to show that the whole motive that drives these myth makers to create this wild story about global warming, their motive is their adherence to collectivism, because they see that collectivism is a way to, they see it, this environmentalism, extremism, I should say, is a way to convince people that in the name of saving the planet from global warming, now they have to give up their liberties, they have to pay huge carbon taxes to the state, and anyway, all these stupid things come because this global warming myth is a cover to stampede into accepting collectivism.
Right.
I'll be talking about that.
Right.
I don't know, I could go on. You're going to be on the program.
Sure.
Yes. Well, I'll let you tell us what you're going to talk about.
Well, I will be talking about how Agenda 21 figures into this whole process, and of course I've been involved with that movement for a very long time as a speaker on UN Agenda 21, and now it's impacting property rights and all of our rights under the veil of global justice, under sustainability. So we'll be talking about that. I think Debbie Boscalupi will be talking on that. I believe that we should also now, because we are running a little short on time, visit a little about what we have planned for next summer at the Red Pill Expo in Montana, because I think people should start to plan for that big event, and it will be international in scope, and it will be a major coming together of liberty groups from all over the world. So maybe if you talk just a little on that.
Yeah, I know we're running out of time, but before we go on, I would like to give a website link for anybody that's interested in learning more about the Global Warming and Inconvenient Lie conference. Just look us up at www.inconvenientlie.com, and it'll get you right to that page. And
good, and that they can also sign up at that at that page as well.
Yeah, definitely. So that's what that's all about. Now, the Red Pill Expo. Well, everybody knows the story of the red pill by now, I'm pretty sure. You take the blue pill and you stay in your little world of fantasy, or you take the red pill and you have to face life the way it really is, and you really see the way it really is. So there are a lot of red pills that need to be taken out of there. In almost every important segment of life that you look at, whether it's education or health care or politics or money or global warming, on and on and on, vaccines, everywhere you look, there's a huge discrepancy between the reality and the fantasy that people believe in. So the purpose of the Red Pill Expo is to bring together all of the souls out there that are aware of different aspects of this matrix, of all of these illusions. They all have one thing in common, and that is that everyone is being manipulated to believe in a fantasy. So there's a reason for that. So they will accept this growing collectivist state. And so we have a twofold mission for this Red Pill Expo. First of all, we want to bring together everybody that sees a part of that. And I'm sure that, even those of us who consider ourselves to be old war horses who've been around this arena for many, many years, there are aspects that almost every week we discover that, oh my gosh, I didn't realize that's part of the matrix too. So all of these people will be coming together, and they'll meet each other. We hope to create a network, a powerful coalition, so that people can come together on this common problem. And that's the one thing. And the other thing is we want the public to come in and learn about things. Some of them know that there's something wrong, but they don't know what it is. So we're not only appealing to people who already know that something is wrong in some field they know all about, but we're appealing to people that just don't know what it is. In fact, our slogan is, it's the Red Pill Expo, because something is wrong. I think many people know something is wrong, but they're not quite sure what it is. So come to the Red Pill Expo. That the date is to be announced, but it's going to be next summer. And as you said, it's going to be in Billings, Montana, which is wonderful.
Bozeman.
I mean,
yes.
Excuse me, Billings. Excuse me. Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Throw me in the dungeon. Bozeman, yes. And a beautiful place in the world. So to look that up on the internet, just go to freedomforceinternational.org. And you'll see it'll be one of the subpages there. In fact, I think if you try redpillexpo.com, it'll probably get there too.
Yeah,
one of the two.
Yeah. Well, Ed, I hate to cut this program off. We've actually gone over just a little bit, because it's such an interesting subject. And but I hope our listeners understand the importance of stressing individualism over collectivism, and I certainly hope that they understand how important their personal involvement is in the government process. And when I say the government process, I mean the right of self-determination through participation. So please, ladies and gentlemen, I hope that you will be active, be involved, and that you will start to make a difference in your own communities, because without you, this will never happen. And with that, I turn the program over to you, Kelby.
Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes this week's show with Connecting the Dots with Dan Happel. God bless. Good night. We'll see you next Thursday, 6 p.m. Pacific.